I don't understand how we get so confident in our trauma that we start to defend our trauma with trauma. You're reinforcing your position in life with trauma responses. I think the first part of growing and healing is recognizing that your language is traumatic. You heard me? Like, we gotta change our tongues and change our minds and really realize, you know, that yeah, you confident in life, but make sure that you're not confident in your trauma. You know what I mean? We have to start monitoring our trauma and realizing that a big bulk of our life, you know, comes from a traumatic experience. That's why it's important that we monitor and change our language. The language that we say to ourselves, you know what I'm saying? We ain't talking about everybody else right now. We talking about the language that we say to ourselves. A lot of the language and the word choices we use, and it comes from a traumatic word bank. That's why I'm so big on words, because, you know, a lot of the words that we use come from a traumatic word bank. Where did those words come from? You hear me? Why are you choosing to use those words, that specific word right there? Why are you choosing to use that? Who taught you that? Mama, daddy, grandma, grandpa, you hear me? Friends, family, or the lack thereof, you know what I'm saying? That's where you got the words from. Change them words. Them words don't serve you no more. Now, they don't serve where you going. That's why unlearning, relearning, and renewing your mind, you know, is so important. Trauma raised us. A lot of us are trauma babies, you know? A lot of us were raised in trauma. You were raised in a traumatic household. You know, you don't even know what life is. You know what existing is, you know what I mean? But you don't even know what living feel like, because you've been surviving through trauma. You know, and I think it's amazing that, you know, that we still here, you know what I'm saying? I think it's amazing that we survived thus far, but surviving ain't enough no more, you know, especially when you've seen the light. You heard me? Like, surviving is not enough no more. You know, we got to start thriving, you know what I mean? But we cannot thrive from a traumatic place. We can't thrive from a traumatic mindset. You know, we have to change our mind. That's real growth. Real growth is letting go of trauma, you know what I mean? We have to recognize it, because a lot of us out here trying to fall in love, but you have not divorced your trauma yet. Like, you still in love with your trauma. How do I know? Because every time you get back to yourself, that inner conversation that you having with yourself, you talking to your trauma. You talking to the inner parts of you that's reinforcing your position, you know, because your trauma can relate to you more than anybody else. That's why you have to let your trauma go. We cannot evolve holding on to our trauma. We cannot evolve holding on to our trauma. We cannot evolve holding on to our trauma. You gotta let trauma go. You know what I mean? And go through real healing. So I had posted a video on TikTok about healing, and somebody asked me a question about trauma. They asked, how do you deal with trauma? Trauma's a tricky thing, because I feel like trauma hides itself inside of our growth. You hear me? Like, trauma's one of them things that will go with you wherever you go. It's not one of the things that come out until it come out. You hear me? Like, it's not something that you can see physically. You hear me? It's one of the things you have to really search for and find. It's like having like a blood clot, or it's like having a leak in a car. You hear me? You don't know where the leak coming from, but you know it's leaking. You gotta go find it. You know what I mean? You can drive this car far. You can go to a lot of places with this leak, but eventually this leak gonna catch up with you. That's how trauma is. You know, it's one of the things that we have to find, but you can't find it by yourself. And a lot of times with trauma, it takes a mirror. It takes somebody to show you your trauma. I was talking to a loved one of mine, and she was telling me why she don't want to do this, why she don't want to do that, why she don't want to go this place. And when she finished, I told her, I said, you know, every response you just made was trauma. Like, you reinforcing your position in life with trauma responses. You know, we can't grow in that space, so we have to monitor, recognize, and evolve from our trauma. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like that's when we really start growing and healing. But we have to be honest with ourselves. I can honestly say that 90%, maybe even 95% of my upbringing, my childhood, my life was traumatic. I was abused as a child, you know, and I was physically abused, mentally abused, verbally. You hear me? Everything but sexually, you know what I mean? But it messed me up for a long time, you know. And as a man, you know, especially when you growing up in the hood, you know, it's difficult to admit, you know, that you were abused in any type of way, you know what I mean? But I was, and it played part in, my growth, my relationships, even how I dealt with myself, because I was abused, my confidence was low, my subconscious was damaged, and that's where the inner conversation comes in. It's in that subconscious. But if my subconscious is damaged, then that's why I'm not growing and loving on myself. Is because my subconscious was abused. You know what I mean? That's why healing is one of the most, if not the most important thing we can do in this life before we experience anything. Because even if you get that thing that you want, you hear me? If your subconscious is unhealed, or if you are in a place of trauma, you won't be able to fully enjoy nothing. You know what I mean? Because the perspective and the lens that you're looking out of is fractured. You heard me? And it's hard to see it. You know what I'm saying?
Power off.
That's why healing is one of the most, if not the most important thing that you can do for yourself, in this lifetime. Because what if we get, the things that we've been wanting this whole time, the relationship, the experiences, the career, what if God gave it to us? We won't be able to experience it properly because we looking out of a fractured lens. We looking out of a traumatic lens, you know what I mean? And it's messing us up, you know what I mean? So we have to really heal, and we have to monitor the subconscious, and really evolve, you know what I mean? So, we gotta stop letting trauma lead us. We gotta stop letting trauma lead us and speak for us and even represent us. Some of us, we not even who we really are. That's your trauma talking. You hear me? You ain't said nothing yet. Your trauma said everything. We wonder why we can't really embrace God's best. You know what I mean? Because we keep self-sabotaging. That's your trauma doing that. We gotta deal with that. And I feel like the best way to deal with that, one is monitoring it, recognizing it, therapy. And as cliche as it sounds for some, going to God about it, like real life. Laying it all out. You know what I'm saying? And telling God, take this from me. You hear me? And that's how it starts. That's where I started at. My growth started with true brokenness, you know what I mean? And realizing that I don't know nothing at all. Realizing that my confidence was a smoke screen. You heard me? Realizing that I was an opportunist. Realizing that my pride kept me in survival mode for so long that I didn't even know what thriving felt like. Realizing that I didn't love myself. Realizing that I didn't know what true peace was. Realizing that I didn't know what solitude was. I knew what loneliness was. You heard me? And I was confident in my loneliness, and I treated it like it was solitude when it wasn't solitude at all. That is where my healing started. You know what I mean? And I encourage everybody to seek that healing. You know what I mean? To really grow in that area. But we gotta stop letting trauma speak for us. You heard me? Stop letting trauma lead our lives. Stop letting trauma sabotage the best things that we have. That's where growth really comes from.